By 3 in the morning, Chicago's waterworks was burning. The pumps failed. The hoses weakened, and a wooden city faced a fire it could no longer fight. Chicago in 1871 was a city growing faster than its safeguards. Its population had reached roughly 300,000, drawn by railroads, factories, grain, lumber, and meat packing. But speed had shaped the city's physical form. Tens of thousands of buildings were wooden or heavily trimmed with wood. Hundreds of miles of sidewalks were wooden, many streets were paved with wooden blocks, and lumber was stacked beside the river. Open flames lit homes and businesses. Tarred roofs, sheds, barns, fences, and closely packed workers' cottages created continuous paths for fire. After months of unusually dry weather, Chicago was not simply vulnerable. It had become a vast field of fuel, waiting for wind and one uncontrolled flame. On Decavan Street, Catherine O'Leary lived beside the barn where the fire was first reported. She kept dairy cows there, but no reliable evidence shows that a cow, a lantern, or Catherine herself started the blaze. The exact ignition remains unknown. What is known is that Chicago's fire department entered that night exhausted. Families lived tightly packed inside streets where flames could move rapidly from house to house. City officials had discussed the danger, but planning had not matched the pace of Chicago's growth. Fire companies were small, equipment was limited, and horses had to pull engines and hose carts through crowded streets. Inspectors could see dry shingles, wooden roofs, and combustible yards almost everywhere. The water system was vulnerable, and pressure depended on a limited pumping network. A serious fire on October 7th had already exhausted crews and damaged equipment before the greater disaster began. Sunday, October 8th was warm, dry, and windy. Shortly after 9 that evening, flames were seen rising from the O'Leary barn. The first alarm was delayed and then misdirected, sending firefighters toward the wrong location. Neighbors formed bucket lines and tried to save the nearby buildings, but sparks and burning fragments were already landing on adjoining roofs. The barn could not be saved. Within minutes, separate buildings were burning faster than the arriving crews could contain them. Driven by a powerful southwest wind, the fire moved north and east. Wooden streets, sidewalks, fences, sheds, and roofs connected one property to the next. Burning shingles and pieces of timber rose high into the air. Some landed far beyond the visible flames and started new fires. The disaster did not advance as one simple wall of flame. It spread through a succession of separate fires, each creating another center of destruction. Neighborhoods could be threatened from several directions at once. There, Chicago's supposed protections failed one after another. Fireproof claims meant little when roofs, windows, interiors, and neighboring buildings burned. The courthouse cupola caught fire. The bell rang above streets filled with people until the tower itself failed. Hotels, newspaper offices, banks, churches, theaters, warehouses, and government buildings burned. People crossed bridges or fled toward the lakefront and open spaces. Some carried trunks and mattresses. Others abandoned everything. The fire crossed the main river and swept into the north side. Flying embers ignited new fires beyond the visible flame front. Fire companies moved where they could, but the city's water system was collapsing. When the pumping station burned, water pressure failed. Firefighters could still move hoses, but increasingly they had little water to deliver. By Monday morning, the commercial center and much of the north side were ruins. The fire continued burning into Tuesday. Rain, weaker winds, and a shortage of fuel helped bring it under control. When the smoke cleared, roughly 3.5 square miles of Chicago had been burned. More than 17,000 buildings were destroyed. Nearly 100,000 people were homeless, and the commonly cited death toll was about 300, although the true number cannot be known with certainty. Relief began while the city was still burning. Churches, schools, private homes, and temporary shelters received displaced families. Food, clothing, money, and supplies arrived from across the United States and from abroad. Mayor Roswell Mason issued emergency orders, while the Chicago Relief and Aid Society became the principal organization distributing donated assistance. The response saved lives, but it also created conflict. Relief officials tried to separate temporary need from long-term poverty. Many immigrant and working-class survivors believed that this system judged them harshly, delayed help, or excluded suffering that did not fit the organization's rules. Yet the fire had destroyed the city's center, not the economic system that made Chicago important. Railroads, stockyards, grain facilities, factories, and major industrial operations outside the burned district survived. Chicago remained the great transfer point between western farms and eastern markets. Its surviving networks could still move workers, food, timber, manufactured goods, and rebuilding materials. Insurance payments and investment funds, much of the money drawn from eastern cities, returned quickly. Within days, merchants reopened in sheds, stands, churches, and temporary buildings among the ruins. Workers cleared streets, surveyed lots, and prepared to replace the destroyed commercial center. Within 6 weeks, work had begun on more than 200 brick and stone buildings in the South Division alone. But Chicago did not rise immediately as a revolutionary city of steel-framed skyscrapers. Owners usually rebuilt familiar commercial blocks with brick, stone, iron, and extensive interior wood. City leaders expanded the fire limits and demanded more brick, stone, and supposedly fire-resistant construction. These regulations reduced some risks, but they also increased the price of rebuilding. Wealthier property owners could borrow, insure, and rebuild. Many working-class families could not. Outside the central district, residents resisted rules that made inexpensive wooden homes illegal or unaffordable. Their pressure forced officials to modify parts of the policy, exposing the conflict between public safety and affordable housing. Rents rose and families crowded into surviving neighborhoods. Rebuilding created jobs, but its rewards were distributed unequally. The fire did not erase inequality, and the famous skyscraper transformation came only later, beginning in the 1880s. Chicago rose from the ashes, but its rebirth combined courage, economic power, regulation, and unequal sacrifice. Was the rebuilding mainly a triumph of public resilience, or did it favor those already positioned to profit from disaster? Share your reasoned verdict in the comments, and subscribe for more carefully researched stories from world history.